Production funding for Behind the Headlines is made possible in part by the WKNO Production Fund, the WKNO Endowment Fund, and by viewers like you. Thank you.
The costs and solutions to neighborhood blight tonight on Behind the Headlines. I'm Eric Barnes, publisher of the Memphis Daily News. Thanks for joining us. I'm joined tonight by Brittany Williams. She's Neighborhood Preservation Fellow with the City of Memphis and the University of Memphis. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Christopher Blank is News Director with WKNO FM. Thank you for being here.
Thanks.
Janet Boscarino is Executive Director with Clean Memphis. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
And Bill Dries is Senior Reporter with the Memphis Daily News. So I'm going to start with you again, Brittany. You've got a kind of complicated but really interesting role in terms of being at the U of M Law School, technically, and working with Neighborhood Preservation, Inc., an independent nonprofit that was set up some years ago, also funded by the City of Memphis, I think. What are some of the priorities for you and the people you work with in terms of tackling blight?
So with my position at the University of Memphis as the Neighborhood Preservation Fellow, one of our key concerns is the litigation part of tackling blight. So we represent the city in a lot of their blight-related cases.
And there have been over 1,000 cases. Is that correct?
That's correct.
As of 2015, I think I saw that you broke 1,000.
Yeah.
So
in 2015, we broke 1,000.
Give an example of what these kind of cases might be on the big scale and on the small scale.
So on the big scale, we mostly deal with vacant and abandoned houses.
And trying to track down who the owners are.
Who the owners are, and then bring them to court to hold them accountable for their properties and to remediate the house. So to fix it all the way up or demolish it.
Yeah, and we'll come back to more of that, but just, Christopher, you did a series last year, award-winning series, 5-part series on WKNO FM that talked about blight in Memphis. Talk a bit about that series and what you learned, and then we'll get back to these folks and how it's trying to be, how blight is being tackled.
Well, I pretty much learned everything there is to know about blight. But I would say the series originated from two angles. First angle was that as a former arts reporter for a newspaper, I like aesthetic issues. And blight is interesting because it's an aesthetic issue, really something for the eyes that has an enormous impact on society. And you know, when we talk about how a city looks, and the cost of cleaning up stuff, we often don't think of that as a priority. Having a beautiful city, we don't think of it as a priority until you start to look at how blight affects everything from health to the economy to poverty. And then the second thing that I found interesting and why I got into this story was a woman named Janine Heiner Buchanan from Safeways. I was talking to her and she said one day, listen, I can tell you where crime is going to happen in this city, and I can tell you where there's going to be a spike in local crime. And I said, how can you tell that? You know, do you have some sort of, are you a savant? She said, no, I just have eyeballs. And I can look around the places in the city and I can tell you where crime is happening by the amount of blight that is being created in an area. I can show you gang graffiti, and that graffiti is an indicator that crime will be going up in that area. Wherever you see neglect in the city, those are places where bad things start to happen.
Yeah, and Janet, I saw you nodding as Christopher was talking. I mean, your group has worked to clean up neighborhoods and rally volunteers, work with the business community, schools. Talk a little about what you do and how that relates to some of the things that Christopher said, because it is an aesthetic issue. No one likes to look at an ugly property, but there are economic ramifications, there are public safety ramifications, and on and on.
All of those. So in our work with neighborhoods, what we try to do is work with them to identify and address the particular blight issues in their community, whether that be litter in some neighborhoods, but a lot of that is really related to blighted properties, whether they're vacant or they're properties that are just not being maintained to a certain level. So you're absolutely right. If it's a vacant and abandoned property with gang graffiti, more often than not, the neighborhood knows there's traffic going in and out of that house. A lot of times they're storing stolen goods in that house. So you have the crime issue, and then you have all of the surrounding homes are depreciating in value because this particular property is pulling the value down. So what we do is to identify, we do a lot of work actually with Neighborhood Preservation, Inc. and identifying those properties, reporting those to code enforcement. In some cases, you can identify who those property owners are and bring them into environmental court. In other cases, then it has to be referred to MPA for a lawsuit. So really it's working with the neighborhoods to identify their blight and to then sort of triage the approach to it. What has to be a case, what has to be code enforcement, and then how can the neighborhood come together to maybe address some of those issues themselves.
Okay, Bill.
So Janet, in this work of identifying blight and identifying what might be the problems going into this, are we winning or losing, or is this kind of static at this point after all of the effort that we've devoted to it?
So I think we're winning in terms of understanding what we're dealing with and having actual data to drive what we're doing. It's just that it's a marathon for sure. It's not an easy fix. It's not an overnight fix. So we've had many factors that have contributed to the blight situation that we have in Memphis with the housing market, with predatory lending, with disinvestment, urban core, all of these things combining to create a pretty overwhelming situation. But I do think we are winning in terms of having now the policy map, which Brittany could probably speak to a little bit more than I can, but housing all of this data to help us drive decisions that we're making. So in that sense, we also have more engagement now than I feel like we've had. I started Clean Memphis, will be 10 years next year, and we can't keep up with the amount of neighborhood people that want to be involved, that are calling to be engaged, they're wanting to address these issues, the number of businesses, the number of schools. So there's definitely more interest and engagement to be involved and become part of the strategy and solution for these issues.
So once you go into an area and you do an initial cleanup, what happens after that? Do you identify the properties that you might wade into before that happens, or once you've got kind of a better sorted out canvas there?
Sure. So the first thing that most neighborhoods want to do is do a cleanup project because it's the easiest entry point for them. That is something they can do. It's something very tangible for them to do. So we work with them to organize quarterly cleanup projects, especially in target areas that they know are problematic, and then work to adopt areas where they have more routine monthly sort of cleanup projects. But alongside that is where we work on pulling and addressing, identifying the specific blight issues. So then it may be some education. Maybe you have people that are living in the neighborhood that are letting, they have their cars parked in the grass. They have all of these different code issues. They're not necessarily negligent property owners. They may just not understand what the code violations are. So we'll work with the neighborhood to do educational outreach with them, helping them understand what the top 10 code enforcements are, try to bring them into the fold, help them understand how this improves all the property values and safety in the neighborhood if we all sort of comply with these rules. And then for the other ones, we try to offer them an opportunity to be on board with the neighborhood. And if that doesn't come around, if they don't come around, then we want to bring the hammer down in code enforcement. So we have an ongoing property list. And I can also mention here there are organizations called Police Joint Agencies, PJAs. There are 11 of those around the city, and they pretty much cover the whole city. And those are neighborhood-led and neighborhood-driven, and essentially they meet once a month. They have a running list of blight and crime issues, and at the table you find MPD, the Sheriff's Department, City Code, County Code, the Health Department, and everybody's working together on a strategy to address these, whether it's citing them and getting them into environmental court, or if it's an elderly person. A lot of times we receive referrals from Judge Potter that are elderly people or veterans who just simply are not financially or physically able to bring properties into compliance. So we'll work with volunteers to sort of bring those together.
Brittany, give me an idea of the legal thicket that you and the other fellows deal with once this hits the legal arena.
So we get our referrals from code enforcement, and by the time we get the referral, it's because they have not been able to get compliance on their part through code enforcement actions. The, I guess, major issues or challenges that we come into contact with is property owners who have, left their property and moved out of state with the housing market crisis. And then we have a lot of properties owned by corporations or defunct LLCs. And then we have a lot of heirship issues with properties, properties owned by people who are now deceased and no one's ever gone in to change title or do anything like that. So a lot of times we're contacting people and they don't realize that they actually own their grandmother's property.
And that what can happen there, if I'm not mistaken, because we've written about it in Christopher stories and so on, the house is worth a whole lot less because it's been abandoned or abused than what might be owed in taxes or other things, right? So legally, if this has happened, I mean, what do you do then? You say, too bad, you owe those taxes, you need to take care of this? Is that part of dropping the hammer, as Janet said?
Well, a lot of it is educating people, one, that, okay, this is now your responsibility. We are citing this property to court, and someone has to take responsibility for it. We do have measures that we go through in court where later on down the line there could be a receiver appointed or someone to come in and rehab the property, and the cost of that rehab will be placed as a lien on the property. So there are long-term, end goal solutions. But in the beginning, we try to work with people. A lot of times, people want to save their grandmother's property. They just did not know it was their responsibility. So.
Do you see things in the system that maybe can be done better, or that over time you can work to kind of change, to make this a fair process, because we are talking about someone's property, but also to try to get things done at the same time?
Right. I do think there are solutions for that, and I think we're doing it now. A lot of things from the partnerships that we have created, working with the county, working with other city departments, working with Clean Memphis and other organizations, they have the contact in the community, so they help us educate people. There also needs to be some change in the legislation, and I think a lot of people are working on that as well.
What would some of those changes be? Because you all have worked, and you work with Steve Barlow, who's been on the show a number of times and has fought this fight for a long time, and other folks who've been engaged in this. Some changes have been made at the state level. Some you all are still going to be working on. What are some of your priorities for the next legislative session?
Well, I know a couple of our concerns is with out-of-town LLCs and trying to hold them more accountable to the properties that they own in Memphis. So we're trying, I believe people are working on a type of legislation for that as well.
Right. In the past, your group, Steve Barlow, we've had him on, and the county trustee, for instance, the redemption, not to get too in the weeds here, but it is behind the headlines, the redemption period when taxes would go unpaid at the city and county level, and then the county seizes it and puts it up for sale, well, the prior owner has, and somebody buys it out of that tax sale. It used to be there was a whole year, if not more, I think it was a full year. The property owner could come out of nowhere and say, no, I want that property back. Now that redemption period, as they call it, is much shorter.
It's a sliding scale.
It's a sliding scale. If the house has been, taxes have been paid for 5 or plus years, it's easier to turn that house around.
It's like a 90-day or so.
And again, these are like the small things, but I'll turn back to well, let's go to Christopher. I mean, these are the small things that people have fought for and talked about. We need these tools, these legal tools, to try and fix this problem. And it does come down to house by house, property by property, owner by owner. Right.
And I actually talked to the mayor about this a little while ago, and they said they do have a comprehensive legislation that they want to run through Nashville. They didn't want to put it through piecemeal last session, so they were going to save it to next session so that they can really make a good case up there. But the United States is about property ownership, and so property owners are well protected by the government, and so creating state laws or even city laws or ordinances that take property away from people, even negligent people, that's one of those fights that you have to fight. But on the other hand, we have it's not just a property and a blight problem, but it's also a humanitarian crisis in Memphis. And if you think about that, we have 9,500 vacant or abandoned homes, but about 4,500 duplexes or apartment complexes that are also abandoned. If you go pay a visit to some of these apartment complexes, they are very large places, and they look like something that you would see in the Mayan jungle as far as being overgrown. Some of those apartment complexes that are slipping down the tubes, people live in those places. And we're talking about people living in housing that have holes in the roof or potholes in the roads. The fire department can't get into their areas. These are people that are going to be without housing if something happens to that apartment complex. So it's a crisis of enormous proportions, moving people around and dealing with all kinds of other issues. One issue, when we talked about the environmental issue earlier, is a lot of these abandoned apartment complexes become dumping grounds for tires, for example. Tires breed mosquitoes. West Nile virus comes to Memphis. That's a perfect spot for a West Nile outbreak. So you have to think of all these different levels of things, which is why the Blight Elimination Charter was created, to bring so many different entities together to deal with this situation through and through, you know?
Yeah, and Christopher, I'll go to you, Janet. Christopher brings up the apartment complexes. When you're talking, you know, I've heard you talk before about going through neighborhoods, and you've got people who live in a single family home, and they, you know, they're either volunteering or they see the volunteers go through and cleaning this up, and they'll come out and say, you know, I'm going to be part of this because this is my little home and this is my neighborhood. Not to stereotype, but at best to generalize, with apartment communities, the stereotype is that those people aren't as connected to their neighborhood.
Correct.
So is the approach for you in terms of working with apartment complexes, working to clean those up, to do education, to do outreach, is it different? I mean, are apartments more transitory? Are the ownership of them might be very far removed from the reality, as Christopher described, of the state of those apartment complexes?
Sure. So I think what you have is with tenants in the apartment complex, and we've done some work with SEPTED with Janine Heiner as well, Janine Heiner Buchanan, and because they are more transient, they also look at the grounds as something maintained by the apartment complex, that they're disconnected from any kind of real responsibility. So we have done some programming to engage residents and do environmental education, and that's worked to some degree, but apartments are a very, very different animal. It's where you see a majority of crime in neighborhoods, and all of those things work together. So it's a complicated issue, and especially in apartment complexes where you have very low, your occupancy levels are very low, and they're all over. I'm thinking of some off of Winchester that we've been working kind of on the E-team, looking at those apartments and what to do with them. Half of them are boarded. You have probably less than 50% occupancy. It would be best if, you know, everyone moved somewhere else and you had another strategy for that area. So it's very complicated.
Yeah, we had some of the housing people on, 2 weeks ago now, Bill, and it was fascinating. I mean, and them, you know, Paul Young from Housing and Community Development and MHA, and it intersects with some of what you're talking about. And I am curious, you said 10 years you've done Clean Memphis. Recently there was the Blight Summit that Neighborhood Preservation put on. I assume you were at the Blight, I couldn't be there. Was that heartening to see more and more groups coming together, more people engaging on the issue? I mean, does it go back to what you were saying earlier about there's progress, but it's a marathon, not you know, a bunch of quick wins? It
absolutely is to me, because when we first started Clean Memphis, you know, there were people involved in this work, but not to the level that there is now. And sort of to Christopher's point too, there are psychological implications to this work, to this issue, and also when you're looking at people in housing, in different housing situations, they are affected. I mean, we really created a culture of where slumlords can sort of exist, and people don't have a place to go. So the very people we're trying to hammer code enforcement on to bring their properties up to standard, if they just decide not to do that and abandon that property, these homeowners have, or these renters have nowhere else to go. They either have credit issues or other things. So there's a really fine line looking at all of these different issues, but definitely seeing the Blight Elimination Steering Team, we have much more expertise at the table to address some of these issues.
Yeah. All right, Bill, about 8 minutes left.
What's the state of the database that we've heard so much about, Brittany, at NPI? Where are you with that? Because that's an enormous undertaking.
So the database is the Memphis Property Hub. And right now we got GIS mapping, so we're able to do that. And we're still trying to collect data from different agencies, make it to where it's on a regular basis. We have data from code enforcement, the registrar's office, trustee's office, and things like that. So right now it's pretty interactive. You can log on, map a couple of properties, you can create an outline, you can analyze different data using the Property Hub. So I think we're in a good place, but we definitely have a ways to go.
Do people use the large physical area that we have as a way to kind of hide or forget about properties that they have here?
Just the size of Memphis,
you
mean?
Just the square miles that we have here, and our lack of density. Is that something that makes this a problem worse?
I think so. I mean, certainly, since we have a lot of population loss in the core of our city, those houses where people moved from, they're still there. The physical structures are still there, and I think that's what we're dealing with a lot of today.
Do you all work with Memphis 3.0, which we're doing a show, and we've done shows on that, which is this effort by the city and to bring people together and sort of say, look, how do we target areas for better transportation, different land use, and so on. It comes into half-empty homes, half-empty apartment complexes, half-empty neighborhoods, and so on.
So with the Blight Elimination Steering Team, we serve as the blight piece of the Memphis 3.0, so advising in that capacity, and then I'm co-chairing the conservation sustainability piece for Memphis 3.0. So there's a lot of interaction of the same people involved in having those conversations.
Can
please.
I add something? One of the reasons we are talking about blight in such a big way today is because when the housing bubble crashed in 2007, it was no longer just houses in urban areas that were blighted. Suddenly, there was blight and abandonment all over the place in the suburbs. And as soon as the blight and the crime started to go up in suburban areas where the houses were very nicely maintained until people could no longer afford them. That's really kind of what brought so many different elements together, because suddenly it wasn't just an urban problem, it was a suburban problem as well.
Right, and you also saw in that, and I remember the city of Bartlett, I think it was the city of Bartlett for a time, and they may still do this, they would look at, okay, homes going into foreclosure and say, we need to watch that, and we need, as a city, it's worth us sending our crew out to mow the lawns and keep the house up, because they knew once if that house goes into foreclosure and it becomes abandoned, becomes blighted, it's going to bring down the property values of the homes around it. Bartlett could maybe do that as a smaller suburban community. How much of that can reasonably happen in the city? I mean, this, I'm sure Jim Strickland, the city council, would love to take care of that, but they have a long list of priorities.
Absolutely, with the number of vacant properties that are out there, I think the county has over 7,500 that they try to attempt to mow several times a year. So it's very difficult.
That's a $2 million blight undertaking just for the property that the county takes back in the tax.
Exactly. We really looked at a zone strategy that we've looked at for Clean Memphis and what Memphis Clean by 2019 is looking at. So we divided the city into 28 zones so that you can sort of take this big elephant and break it down into bite-sized pieces. Now let's look at this particular zone. Who's in this zone doing work? How can we engage them at a higher level? What are our blight issues? What are our vacant lot issues? What kind of strategies can we employ to address these issues, because it's very hard to do on this large scale of the entire city.
I've heard you talk before about working with schools and programs. You talk about that. I mean, engaging kids and some of the things you do with them, which I assume, again, I've heard you talk about it, is probably just to educate them on things they can do and choices they can make, and hope to long-term change people's attitude about litter and so on.
Well, from a litter standpoint, the research shows that the primary litter age is between 14 and 26. So our goal really is to raise a generation of kids who better understand how to interact with their environment and are grounded in civic responsibility. So we have an education team, and they work in schools from kindergarten to 12th grade, and they look at broader environmental issues. So not only litter abatement, watershed health, where we get our drinking water from, recycling, energy conservation, pretty broad environmental STEM-based and environmental education, all tied to their standards. So our goal is to touch those kids throughout their entire time in school. So every grade we're attempting to be engaged with them. We set up a sustainability certification for schools, and they work towards these sustainability measures. So it's real, for us it's important, because that's how you change the trajectory.
Yeah.
More accountability.
And Christopher, again, back to your story, which is is it on the WKNO FM website that people can, again, and the title was of the series?
City of Grit.
City of Grit.
Yeah.
Again, some of the hopeful things you saw in that.
Well, some of the hopeful things, there's an interesting correlation between what happened in 1930 when Boss Crump created the City Beautiful Commission, and he decided to clean up the city. And the way he did this was by getting so many different organizations to join forces and work on these neighborhoods. And it's what the city needed. The city absolutely needed to join forces, especially in the collection of data. And they sort of, they know the importance of it. But one of the great things about the data collection that has happened in the past couple years is it draws from so many different sources that you can now predict where blight is going to be forming. They couldn't do this before. They can now look at bank information and housing prices and things like that, put them all together and figure out where it's going to be happening, prevention is the best cure in Memphis, and it's something that they've realized in the past few years, and I think that's one of the things that the city is working much harder on doing, preventing it before it even starts.
Yeah, and just with a minute left here, I want to come back to you, Brittany. You are part. We tried to describe the complicated. It's not that complicated, but complicated relationship. You're at the U of M and the city,
right?
But you're a law graduate from the University of Memphis, and part of the clinic there. Is that right? Talk about what the students at U of M are doing on this issue, because Steve Barlow for years was sort of fighting this alone. I mean, we'd have him on the show, or I'd see him somewhere, and he and a handful of people. But he tapped into law students and recent graduates of U of M to kind of expand his ability to take people to court on these issues. Talk a little bit about the clinic.
Right, so actually Steve Barlow is the co-director of the clinic. He co-directs it with Danny Shafton. He's a professor at the law school. And each semester the clinic takes on about 8 students, law students. They're usually in their second or third year. And they help us litigate the cases. So they represent the city of Memphis in these cases against owners of vacant and abandoned houses.
And did you do that before you graduated from law school?
Yes.
Is that kind of how you got connected to the whole thing? Will you stay in this? I'm kind of curious.
I hope to. I really enjoy what I do. I really think it affects the community, and I think we're going in a good place, so I hope to.
Okay. And just with 20 seconds left, what if the city or county or the state legislature could do one thing, 2 things, whatever, what would they do?
Wow, that's a quick one. So for immediate need for neighborhoods, we're looking at a nuisance abatement ordinance, and that's what we're working. That would allow people in their neighborhoods to address blighted properties and not be considered trespassing. They can go on and mitigate the blight if they can't track people
Mow
down.
the lawn themselves,
Yes,
get rid of some of the
absolutely.
trash themselves, and so on. And
In the
not
short
be
term, that
trespassers.
would be very beneficial for neighborhoods.
All right. Well, thank you, and thank you all for joining us. Thank you for joining us. Join us again next week. Good night.